Chapter 21, Solid, Toxic, and Hazardous Waste. These notes are a review of the notes packet that we went over on Thursday in class. Solid waste. Solid waste is made up of agricultural, mine tailings, road, building, and construction debris that is not hazardous. Agricultural makes up the majority of solid waste. Mine tailings comes in about 1/3, and then road and building construction makes up the rest. Overall, the U.S. produces 11 billion tons of solid waste per year. There are other types of waste. Industrial waste, these would be things from manufacturing, make up 400 million metric tons. Municipal waste, which is household and commercial waste, make up 200 million metric tons of waste. We consider this a waste stream. The waste stream is the steady flow of varied waste that we all produce. Anything produced by humans is considered waste. The trash you take out, the grass that you mow and you throw out, extra packaging from things that you unpack, different construction materials, leftover wood after building a home, this is all considered part of the waste stream. The first way we dispose of waste is in open dumps. Open dumps are unregulated piles of waste. These are usually in developing countries, but currently they're being replaced by incineration, since open dumps seem to be a bit of a problem. They're illegal in most metropolitan areas, but can still be found other places. The pros to open dumps are that they are cheap, so it's easy to create them, and also they provide an area for people to live and scavenge for those who are less fortunate. The cons of open dumps are obvious in that they are unregulated, so there could be pollution issues if pollution leaks into water sources. Also, because they are exposed to wind and rain, it is likely that the material will move from the dump area to surrounding areas as well, which could cause problems. And finally, they are prone to infestations. Waste disposal, ocean dumping. Another option for trash disposal is dumping in the ocean. Yearly, we put 200 million tons of plastic debris in the ocean. Even though most areas have gotten rid of ocean dumping, waste still ends up in there, whether it is by accident or on purpose. 25,000 metric tons of waste are dumped into the ocean every year, and 150,000 tons of fishing gear are either dumped intentionally or unintentionally into the water as a result of the fishing industry. These would be fishing nets from large fishing companies, things that may have sunk and they are not able to retrieve any longer. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is an area in the Pacific Ocean that is essentially a mass of plastic garbage that has not disintegrated and will not break down, and this is slowly circulating thanks to the ocean currents in the Pacific Ocean, so it is a large area of trash. Now, there are really no pros to ocean dumping, mostly cons here, which is the fact that it's polluting our water and it's also creating our shore areas to have lots of pollution washing up, which makes them unpleasant and reduces the tourism value. Waste disposal exporting. We can also export our trash. Mainly we choose to export electronic waste, also called e-waste. This is any type of electronic devices. We can think of iPods, cell phones, laptops, computers, MP3 players, video game systems. These are all examples of e-waste. Usually we send these overseas to developing countries. In the developing countries, they break down the e-waste, which will then break down into pieces of plastic and then toxic components. What can be reused will be reused by those developing countries. We've banned this practice because of the toxic components that we're exposing these areas to, but we still practice it anyway. The pros to exporting is that it is cheap and it moves the pollution or the problem away from the home country. The cons would be that it is exposing these developing nations to toxic chemicals and waste that they may not have a management system for. This is why we try to make producers responsible for the electronic waste that they produce and have them recycle the products themselves. Waste disposal, secure landfills. Secure landfills are our first good option for controlling our waste. These are regulated and controlled unsorted facilities, so we throw all the waste into one area together, we compact the waste, and then we cover it with dirt. Essentially, we are digging a gigantic bathtub in the ground, We are smushing our waste together. We are layering it in there. We're covering it up with dirt, so it's like we're putting a little lid on top of our bathtub, and that is how we are creating this. Now, we would have a lot of problems if we were just putting it directly into the ground, but this bathtub that we create, we line with either clay or a plastic lining so that the waste, as it decomposes, does not contaminate the surrounding water sources. However, this can eventually become a problem if it was not secured properly. This is the most popular form of waste disposal. The pros are that it is regulated, it produces less pollution, it's more controlled. We're not going to have the risk of trash flying everywhere or of people living in the trash and becoming prone to disease or vermin. But the cons are that it is possible for a leak to occur and for the trash to contaminate the water, and then essentially it would spread disease or other issues through the water table if the lining was not made properly or wore down over time. Now, secure landfills will be closed when they become filled. This is also a con because we can actually max out. Over time, they could reopen a landfill, put more trash in it, and then close it again. But once trash has been placed in a landfill, it is there for the rest of time until it disintegrates, or if it does not degrade, then it will stay there indefinitely. Waste disposal incineration. Incineration has a fancy name called energy recovery. This is when we burn waste and produce heat. We then capture this heat and use it to either heat a building or a location, or we can use that heat to create steam and run a turbine to gain electricity. So we are taking our waste and turning it into a renewable energy source. We have two types of incineration methods. The first one is called refuse-derived fuel, and this is when we sort out the trash, as opposed to our landfills where we just dump all the trash in. Incineration, specifically refuse-derived fuel, will sort specifically through the trash so that we can get a higher energy yield when burning. Now, mass burning does have some sorting, not as much, because all the sorting it does is that it takes out anything that's larger than something the size of, say, a sofa or a fridge. Anything smaller than that will be thrown into the gigantic furnace, and it will be burnt to produce heat energy. The pros of this are that it produces a renewable energy source for us, but we do have some cons that go with it in the fact that there is some air pollution that is produced by this energy recovery method. Although the levels are very low and considered non-harmful, this still is something that we need to be aware of. Also, we want to note that this is a little bit more expensive. As we go through and have more technology added, we're going to have more expensive types of dealing with our waste, since we have to now go through and sort our waste as opposed to just throwing it in one location. Waste reduction, recycling. Once we figure out all the ways we can dispose of our waste, we can then try to reduce our waste stream. Recycling is the first method. This is melting or shredding of discarded materials to make new, useful products. The key to recycling is that you're taking old material and making something new out of it. You're not just reusing it in the same form, but recreating something. Now, you could recreate the same item by taking an aluminum can, recycling it to make a brand new aluminum can. Or you could make a new product, say taking old tires and shredding them to create road surfacing. Aluminum cans are some of the most recycled items in the United States due to promotion and ease of recycling. Now, recycling is really great because it reuses the materials, which means we have less needs for these natural materials. It usually costs less to produce than to harvest the material in the first place. So not only are we finding a cheaper method to produce something, but we are also coming up with a way to save our non-renewable resources. The cons are that it is expensive. There aren't a whole lot of incentive plans, especially for companies, to buy recycled materials. So sometimes the recycled products have a hard time finding a new home. Waste reduction, composting, and demanufacturing. Composting and demanufacturing are very similar, except one is done in your home and the other is probably done at a factory. Composting is when you take yard waste, tree trimmings, and allow it to break down naturally. Demanufacturing is when you take an item into a factory and disassemble it and recycle the obsolete parts. So in both examples, we're breaking something down. One, we're letting nature take it because these are organic materials, and the other, we're taking our non-organic materials, breaking it down ourselves, and reusing what we can. Waste reduction, reusing. We can reuse something in its present form multiple times. A really good example of this would be reusing a bottle or a bag that you go to the trash with, or the bag that you take to the supermarket, or reusing your supermarket bags as trash bags. There we go, mixed up two together. But reusing is basically taking it in its same form and using it multiple times. This is different from recycling because you're not creating something new. Reducing the remaining waste. So we figured out how to recycle and reuse waste, how we can repurpose things, how we can get rid of things through conventional waste methods, but we can also produce products that actually create less waste for us. And we have two different types of plastics we've developed: photodegradable plastic and biodegradable plastic. Photodegradable plastics will break down when exposed to UV sunlight over time, and biodegradable plastics will break down naturally because they are made of cornstarch over time. So these would be good types of plastics to add to landfills because essentially they will break down and then lower the amount of waste in the landfill over time. Let's talk about our hazardous and toxic wastes. Now these are dealt with differently. Hazardous wastes are considered any material, liquid, or solid that can fit into the following categories. They can be fatal in low doses, toxic, carcinogenic, mutagenic, teratogenic. They can ignite with a flash point lower than 60 degrees Celsius. They could be corrosive or explosive. All hazardous and toxic waste materials are inventoried in the Toxic Release Inventory, which are annual reports that companies must submit on over 300 toxic materials. Brownfields are large areas of contaminated property that are abandoned due to real or suspected contamination. So if we're not sure if an area is toxic or not, we'll let it lay waste and not use it. Now, as the case study in the book pointed out, we could use certain plants and plant them in those areas to naturally draw out the toxins, since those plants use those heavy toxic metals or something else that is in the soil, and then essentially clean the area so that we can get rid of that label of brownfield and turn it into a productive land source. Finally, here are some solutions to toxic waste. We can produce less waste. We can come up with non-toxic solutions. We can convert our toxic waste. The method of bioremediation is when we take microorganisms, maybe bacteria as an example, and allow them to absorb and break down and re-release the toxin in a different form. A really good example of this is the bacteria that actually will ingest oil. So if there's an oil spill, we can release this bacteria, and then the bacteria will eat up some of the oil and get rid of that waste material, so that way we can actually produce less we have less toxic waste in that area. Another option is to store our toxic waste. We have permanent retrievable storage, which are secure facilities that will have basically a tub that is secured and locked down with the toxic waste in it so that it is unreachable. An example of this is when we talked about nuclear power. We said we had those leftover control rods that were toxic because of their high level of radiation, and we put those in containers, usually submerged in water, and then we stored them in the bottom levels of buildings. Now, if we don't have a building to store it in, as we discussed with the nuclear power plant options as well, we could store in underground caverns or in salt mines, which would then take up less space. We need to make sure that we pick good locations, though, so that the location that's selected isn't going to be prone to earthquakes or other geological phenomena, so that the toxic containing containers could then fall open and become an issue. And then finally, we could use secure landfills for our toxic waste, as long as we make sure that those secure landfills are sealed and vented properly.